And since none of that exists right now, none of that is happening. Now, this the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, could in fact become a very important instrument in this process, because in fact what they did during the Depression is that they gave contingent second mortgages to homeowners when in fact banks wrote off principal. So if in fact you had a home that was worth $100,000 and a bank had made a loan to you for $80,000, and now the property was worth $50,000, and the bank decided that they would refinance with you instead of foreclosing and having a $50,000 home that, God forbid, they really didn't want, the homeowner would stay in the home at $50,000, and the bank now effectively had $30,000 of contingent principal that it in fact had lost. And the HOLC would then come in and actually guarantee that $30,000, and when the homeowner sold the home a few years from now, that $30,000 would either be paid back to the bank if in fact the price had not increased, or if the price had in fact readjusted itself to $80,000, the United States government through HOLC would receive a contingent second mortgage of that $30,000. And during the Roosevelt administration, while this was a huge program, the government only lost 15% of all the money that it laid out. Now, of course, it didn't receive any income for it, but it received back 85% of that money. And so if you do that, and you also have the allowance of bankruptcy judges to reset principal, this government agency could in fact participate in that whole concept. The other thing that President-elect Obama discussed was a 90-day moratorium on foreclosures once elected. Now, it's interesting because his new proposal right now doesn't talk about any of this. Instead, what he's trying to talk about is making sure that people are employed and that they have health care, and that in fact their most essential needs are met. And that may work short term, but long term we need to address these systemic issues. Next, please. Robert Schiller, a Yale professor, he's been talking about this for years now, and finally everyone's listening to him. He's been out there basically talking about the problems. A lot of the issues I'm talking about today are from his book. Most of my thoughts are not original. You can go read Schiller's book if you want. Okay, this is great. These are my favorite pictures. You got here a guy involved with a bailout. But what is he bailing out? He is bailing out a swimming pool. He's bailing out a swimming pool in Southern California that he's going to convert to a skateboard park. That's right. He is converting an abandoned house that's been foreclosed, that's owned by a bank that's not fulfilling its social responsibilities to maintain the property. And look what these guys did. They cleaned the pool out. They made the place look beautiful, and they invited their friends from Germany to come over to one of the great skate parks in the United States, next to someone's home. And I am not joking. This is all absolutely true. Oh, and here you got a nice group of guys who are going to come over and be your neighbors henceforth, okay? And then maybe they're going to choose not to go home one night, okay? And maybe they're going to start, sleeping, in the house that's now their new skateboard park, right? And then when they need to borrow some sugar, they'll certainly come over and knock on your door and ask for a cup of sugar. And of course you're going to give them. Anyway, this is what we're talking about, okay? This is the potential for a real social crisis. And unless the government absolutely deals with it, you're going to have, and again, this is not my term, this comes from the Atlantic magazine over a year ago. They were talking about suburban blight. And if you don't believe it occurs, I could take you to homes in Weston that have been completely abandoned, have been completely destroyed, and you won't read about it in the papers because no one wants to talk about this stuff. But it's real, and it's there, and you need to know about it. But I think these pictures are great. Now let's talk about loan modifications. Am I okay here? Because I still got a little bit. Okay. One of the things that the banks are talking about, they're talking about loan modifications, and we're seeing some loan modifications. But it's like the three bears. You can't be too big, and you can't be too fat, and you can't be too little and too small. You have to be just right. Now, what do I mean too big? Okay, if you're paying your mortgage every single month and you're keeping your credit good, and you go knocking on the bank's door asking for a modification, you're too big and you're too fat. Okay. If you're this little bear over here, you just lost your job, you have no income, and you're asking for a modification, the bank's going to say, well, how are you going to pay the new mortgage payment? We're going to reduce your interest rate. We may even take some principal and turn it on the bank. Not going to write off any principal. Banks aren't writing off principal. Everything I've talked about in terms of loan modifications right now is changing the term and changing the interest rate. And once in a while, maybe taking some principal, taking some back interest payments and recharacterizing it as principal. But if you don't have the income, okay, if you can't show enough money coming in each month to even pay that mortgage payment, you're not going to get. And this is an interesting statistic, and most people don't know this. 50% of all modifications that have occurred in the past year and a half are now in default. Okay? So if you're the little bear over here, forget it. Okay. The middle bear. You got income. Maybe you were laid off for a few months. You've missed a few payments, but you're doing okay. Your credit's been impaired, but you still have a job. You still look good. You will receive a modification, and your modification will probably be a reduction in interest rate. Maybe some payments you missed will be tacked on at the back end. You will get it. Unfortunately, until the new Obama administration's plan kicks in, where we can get people actually working again, there won't be a lot of modifications. There just won't be. You're going to have too many people who are little bears, and then you got people maybe sitting in this room who are two big fat bears, and they're just going to be stuck. Next. Shays Rebellion, very interesting. Anyone remember Shays Rebellion from your history book? I had completely forgotten it until I was asked to learn it twice. Once from my kid's AP class, she was studying it, and then my son's 7th grade, he was also studying it. And of course, there were two different takes on it. But Shays Rebellion occurred during the Articles of Confederation. That was before the United States Constitution. And why was there a rebellion? Because the farmers in western Massachusetts didn't like the idea that they should be going to jail when they don't pay their mortgage. And they got upset with the judges because they felt that the judges were not effectuating due process in terms of their foreclosures. And they actually attacked the courthouse, and there was a rebellion led by Shays, and the government was not prepared to respond to it, and it basically created a crisis, and that crisis was basically the dissolution of the United States under the Articles of Confederation. And then we had to, of course, go to the Constitution, where the government had its own military and could have probably responded to Shays' rebellion. In fact, the judges all ran home, they locked their doors, and the folks were not foreclosed on for a period of time. My concern just is that if we don't deal with the foreclosure crisis in some sort of collective, intelligent way, that you could have some sort of social crisis. Next. The Obama plan. Okay. Talked about the moratorium for 90 days. He talked about give more authority to bankruptcy judges. We talked about that. Allow what's called cram downs. We allow what are called cram downs in the commercial context. We do not allow it right now in the residential context. It is important not just for the individual homeowner, but it is important in order of repricing the securities that are out there and allowing banks to anticipate that risk in making new loans. HOLC Reborn, most of the folks, including Schiller, do not believe that whatever the government has proposed as of right now, including what Congress is looking at, is going to be sufficient. I think it's probably a great first step. I think probably coming out of the box with something that was too aggressive would probably have been a mistake for the president. He wants to show that he's being collaborative, that he's respectful of the Republicans, that he thinks that we need to work with taxes and making sure that we're throwing more money out there. But at the end of the day, we will need to swallow a bitter pill by basically recreating some sort of government agency like the HOLC that will allow for principal write-off of existing loans. I mean, if you leave here with anything today, does it not make more sense for someone who lives in a home, who doesn't want to give up the home, who pays the maintenance, who actually, in fact, fulfills the obligation of home ownership in a socially responsible way? Isn't it better for them to own the home as opposed to a bank that is not in that business, is not capable of doing that, and therefore is going to allow skateboarders from Germany to take over a neighborhood? I mean, it's just the way it's going to be. Okay, shift risk away from the banks to be absorbed by the government. I mean, it's a little unfair to the banks to just be writing off principal and not getting something back for it. And it's not fair to their shareholders. And I think at the end, the government is going to have to step in. In terms of rewarding folks who did bad, the banks are us, okay? I mean, we're the shareholders of the banks. We invest in the banks. We need to make sure our banks remain solvent. I mean, when a bank, pays ridiculous bonuses to their executives for not doing a good job, that's a different story. But in terms of making sure that our economic system remains solvent, that is something that we all need to share in that collective responsibility. This particular program would cost another $300 billion. That's in excess of the $700 billion that they're talking about right now. So most people are saying that we're in a $1 to $3 trillion mess, and so I would suggest that at some point you're going to see some of this stuff coming along.